Today, we're taking on a pretty critical mission, actually. We want to move past just that feeling, of being stressed out. We're going deep into the physiological truth, what stress actually does to your body. Our sources, they define stress really precisely, not just an emotion, right? It's any stimulus, internal or external, that forces a biological response, something that tries to knock your internal balance, your homeostasis, off kilter. So we're unpacking the evidence showing how this pressure, it physically gets inside and starts to degrade our core systems.
And understanding this is, well, it's vital for you, the listener, because stress, it's often more than a side issue. It can be an aggravating factor, a trigger, sometimes even a direct cause for so many different health problems, these pathological conditions. We really need to grasp the how. How does chronic stress physically change the hardware? Your brain tissue, immune cells, arteries, the things keeping you going.
It really is like a full body assault, isn't it? We're going system by system today, starting with the command center, the central nervous system, the CNS, where it all begins perception-wise. Then we'll hit the immune system, cardiovascular, and the gastrointestinal system too. So let's start with the brain. The brain's battleground, you could say.
Right. And when we talk about chronic stress effects on the brain, the main players are stress hormones, specifically glucocorticoids. Cortisol is the one most people have heard of. And the research is clear. These hormones, released when you're stressed, they easily cross the blood-brain barrier. They get right in.
Okay, so they cross into the brain. And what happens when you have high cortisol levels just washing over the brain constantly? You mentioned physical changes. I mean, are we talking actual measurable loss? Is stress physically shrinking the brain?
We are. We're talking about atrophy, a wasting away of tissue. Chronic stress exposure demonstrably leads to, yes, a decrease in overall brain weight and mass. And the area that seems most affected, or at least the most studied, is the hippocampus.
The hippocampus. Why that specific area?
Because it's absolutely loaded with receptors for these stress hormones. It has the highest density of glucocorticosteroid receptors anywhere in the brain. It's like stress has a VIP pass straight to the part of your brain responsible for forming long-term memories.
Wow. So constant high cortisol hits this memory center hardest, leading to memory problems, obviously. What kind of structural damage are the studies showing, like specifically?
Well, we see a reduction in dendritic branches. Those are the tiny connections neurons use to talk to each other. Also, decreased neurogenesis, that's the creation of new neurons. It slows down. And overall, just fewer neurons in that hippocampal tissue. Clinically, this shows up as declarative memory disorders, problems recalling facts and events. And we see this pattern in people with Cushing syndrome. They have naturally high glucocorticoids, and also in PTSD. PTSD patients often show a measurable reduction in hippocampus volume and perform poorly on verbal memory tests.
Okay, let's unpack this, because it's not always bad, right? There's a weird paradox here in the sources. Stress doesn't always wreck memory. Sometimes it seems like it can actually sharpen it.
That's the crucial nuance, yes. Acute stress, something sudden, high stakes, maybe unfamiliar or even life-threatening, that kind of stress can temporarily boost brain function. It can improve memory recall in that moment. It's priming you for survival, essentially. But the really interesting thing, the key lesson here, is about the timing. It matters hugely when the stress hits relative to when you learn something. If those glucocorticoids are released shortly after you learn something new.
After.
Yes, after. It seems to actually help consolidate the memory, like it reinforces the brain storing that data.
So maybe a bit of intense activity or some manageable stress right after studying could actually help lock it in?
Potentially, yes. It could help in the encoding the storage part. And this is but if that stress happens right before you need to retrieve the memory, like just before a big exam or presentation, then it significantly tanks your recall ability. It decreases memory power. It's almost like the high cortisol state, which is focused on immediate survival and new incoming data, creates interference. It sort of blocks access to the older stored information you're trying to pull up. Retrieval gets disrupted.
That's fascinating. The difference between encoding and retrieval under stress is huge. Okay, let's broaden out from just memory. What about general cognition? Learning, decision-making, attention span?
Right, cognition involves the hippocampus, but also the amygdala and the prefrontal cortex. And the net effect of chronic stress across these areas, usually it's a reduction in function. The long-term impact comes from those glucocorticoids again. They actually change gene expression in these brain regions. That's how you get that long-term decline. And what's really important is the individual threshold. Mild stress might actually facilitate some cognitive functions, maybe sharpen focus for a bit. But once the stress intensity crosses your personal tipping point, and it's different for everyone, That's when you see disruption. Memory gets fuzzy, judgment gets impaired, and that particularly hits the prefrontal cortex, your executive function center.
And the sources definitely link chronic stress with mood disorders too, don't they? Like depression.
They absolutely do. The cognitive problems you see with chronic stress often look a lot like classic depression symptoms. And physiologically, there's overlap too. You often see high levels of inflammatory markers like interleukin-6, IL-6, and at the same time, a drop in something called BDNF.
BDNF, brain-derived neurotrophic factor. That's like a fertilizer for brain cells, right? Helps them grow and repair.
Exactly. So chronic stress reduces the brain's ability to maintain itself and grow new connections while simultaneously flooding it with these inflammatory signals. Not a good combination.
No, definitely not. And that ties perfectly into the next system, the immune response. This idea that your state of mind affects your immune system isn't new, is it?
Not at all. It's ancient. Galen, back around 200 AD, noted that melancholic women seemed more prone to cancer. It was an observation, of course, but modern science has now verified the mechanisms behind that link.
So what is the mechanism? How do stress mediators actually weaken our defenses?
It's all about that central stress pathway, the HPA axis, hypothalamic pituitary adrenal axis. Stress activates it. This triggers a cascade, CRH release, then ACTH, which finally leads to that flood of glucocorticosteroids we keep mentioning. And these glucocorticosteroids are the body's own powerful anti-inflammatory drugs.
Okay, but they're also immunosuppressants then.
Precisely. They dampen the immune response by inhibiting key immune cells, lymphocytes, macrophages. Now, short term, this is useful. It prevents over-the-top inflammation. But under severe, prolonged stress, the system stays suppressed, constantly dampened down. This leads to decreased activity of really important fighters like cytotoxic T lymphocytes and natural killer cells.
And those are the cells that go after infections and cancerous cells, right?
Exactly. So if their activity is down long term, the sources clearly connect chronic stress to a higher risk of things like genetic instability, tumor growth, even malignancy. You're literally less equipped to fight off major threats when you're chronically stressed.
Wow. Okay, let's shift gears. From the brain and immune system to the body's engine room, the cardiovascular system. Here, too, the sources confirm a definite link between chronic stress and heart disease.
Yes, a strong positive association. And the key player here is the autonomic nervous system. Stress basically flips switches in this system. If the sympathetic nervous system, your fight or flight response, takes over, you get those classic effects. Heart beats faster, contracts harder, and crucially, vasoconstriction.
Vasoconstriction, that's the tightening of blood vessels.
That's right. Think of it like this. Stress triggers what's called alpha-adrenergic stimulation. It's like an internal alarm telling blood vessels, especially around the heart, to clamp down. This spikes blood pressure, can contribute to clotting problems, speeds up atherosclerosis, hardening of the arteries, and most dangerously, it increases that coronary vasoconstriction, squeezing the heart's own blood supply. This significantly raises the risk of a heart attack, myocardial infarction, MI, and even sudden cardiac death. Stress can literally squeeze the life out of your heart's supply lines.
That clamping down effect, plus chronic high blood pressure.
Yeah, sounds like a terrible combination long term. There was one interesting note in the sources about a potential protective factor for women. That's correct. Statistically, women tend to develop cardiovascular disease about 10 years later than men. This is largely thought to be due to the protective effects of estrogen before menopause. But make no mistake, chronic stress is still a huge risk factor for everyone, regardless of gender.
Okay, now, here's where it gets really interesting for me, personally. The gut. Let's travel down that brain-bowel axis to the gastrointestinal system. I mean, everyone knows that feeling, right? Stomach churning before a big meeting. But the actual physiology is deep.
Oh, it's incredibly deep and complex. Stress absolutely uses this brain-bowel connection. It alters appetite involving brain areas like the VTA and amygdala, and it fundamentally messes with normal GI function across the board.
How specifically does it damage the physical gut barrier itself?
Well, several ways. Stress can increase intestinal permeability, making the gut leaky. It changes mucus production, alters stomach acid secretion, and this is critical. It can actually reactivate previous inflammation. Think of conditions like silent colitis that might have been dormant, under control. Stress can basically stir them back up.
Whoa, so it's not just about causing new problems, it's about bringing old ones roaring back.
Exactly, making existing vulnerabilities flare up badly. And a major player in this whole inflammatory mess is the mast cell. These are immune cells in the gut lining. They're super sensitive to stress signals. When triggered, they release a cocktail of neurotransmitters that just flood the GI system. This ramps up inflammation, makes the gut hypersensitive. It's a key reason why conditions like Crohn's disease and especially irritable bowel syndrome, IBS, are so strongly linked to stress.
And stress even affects motility, the actual movement of food through the system, but differently in different parts.
Yeah, it's almost contradictory. Stress tends to slow down. Stomach emptying food sits longer in the upper tract, but at the same time, it often speeds up movement through the colon, the lower tract. This kind of mismatch is driven by mediators like CRH corticotropin-releasing hormone. CRH is such a big factor here that it's actually being looked at as a potential target for new IBS treatments, trying to block its effects in the gut.
Okay, so we've hit CNS atrophy, weakened immunity, squeezed arteries, gut chaos. All this system-wide disruption seems coordinated ultimately by the body's hormonal control center, the endocrine system.
You really can't separate stress from the endocrine system. The relationship is completely intertwined, mutual. Even what seems like minor stress immediately kicks that HPA axis into gear. And from there, the influence spreads out. It affects the gonads, the thyroid, the pancreas, all the major hormone producers. It's the central command post for the body's survival response.
Yeah.
Even if that response run chronically causes immense collateral damage.
So where does this leave us? We've seen stress has this dual nature. It can be beneficial, right? Acute stress helps us survive, preserves homeostasis in the short term. But chronic stress is profoundly harmful, leading to all these pathological conditions across basically every major system.
The big takeaway, I think, is that the medical world needs to fully appreciate just how systemic stress is. And critically, because people respond so differently physiologically to the exact same stressor, well, treatment has to be personalized, highly individualized. It really demands a holistic view, combining, medications where appropriate, but also really focusing on non-drug approaches, lifestyle changes, mindfulness, targeted stress reduction techniques.
Yeah, it's been quite a journey. From seeing the hippocampus shrink and memory retrieval get blocked, to arteries tightening and raising heart attack risk, and even dormant gut inflammation getting reactivated by mast cells, stress truly gets everywhere.
Absolutely. And given how unique each person's stress response is, those subtle neuroendocrine differences we talked about, the crucial question for you listening isn't just how much stress am I under? It's more like, how is my specific biology wired to handle this pressure? Is it sharpening my mind for a moment? Or is it starting that slow, steady process of breaking down my body from the inside out?
That really brings us to a final provocative thought for you to chew on. Knowing what we learned about timing, that stress hormones released after learning can actually help consolidate memory. Think about this. Could you strategically schedule something intense, maybe a hard workout or some other focused activity right after finishing a complex project or a heavy study session? Could you maybe use that post-learning stress response to deliberately optimize how you lock in long-term memories? Something to consider until our next deep dive.